Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, one man is proudly here to present you with his rants and raves about what is going wrong with America. Me, a fan, a Ron Paul fan. So, you'll notice the image here. I got gold, I got some dollars. Watching financial news all week can be nauseating. As I sit here doing other work, I thought I would just talk briefly about some of the things I'm seeing on the news and how it correlates to what is going wrong in a lot of ways with the U.S. Now, there's always ways to make money. I'm not a financial advisor by any stretch. There's always ways to make money. So ups and downs, and we're going to see a lot of downs, doesn't mean you can't make money. But I would say that what's disingenuous about what I see on the news is there is a commitment to talking about inflation now because it's so hard to ignore because it's exploding in our face, right? So that part is obvious. But what you don't see a commitment to talking about is what type of inflation. So I'm going to give my opinion. You can do your own research. A lot of my philosophy on this comes from the great Ron Paul. He really opened my eyes in a lot of ways back in about 2006 when I was introduced to him from a friend. But let me just say this. You hear about inflation and pricing inflation. There's a lot of talk about the consumer pricing index. There's a lot of talk about world issues that are driving the supply chain demand issues, the pricing inflation issues, and they correlate it to COVID. They correlate it to the chip shortage. They correlate it now to the war in the Ukraine. Again, I would suggest that these things are true as far as these are issues that are out there. They do exist, but they are not the driving force of our pricing inflation. Pricing inflation, CPI index change, and supply chain are issues that have their own merit and have their own consequence, but the true root cause is monetary inflation. And there is a huge difference between the two. Different factors can affect pricing. Whether you have a sound currency, whether you have bad currency, whether you have peacetime, whether you have wartime, there's many things that can affect pricing. If I have a market, let's say there's a market for hamburgers in my town, and there's three or four really good burger joints, and they're all making money. And then something happens where suddenly the price of meat goes up by 15% in a week. All of these places are going to be impacted. There's going to be a pricing issue, right? So some of these places, like maybe the burger shop that does the most amount of business, they can increase their prices strategically, incrementally, right? Because they have enough volume in business that they can sustain a slight decline in margins. Maybe they let go of some staff or they change hours. They do something. The smaller the business that does the least amount, that price change in the cost of meat would hurt their ability to make money. So they're going to have to make the most dramatic change. And they're probably going to pass the cost on to the consumer. So I'm going to have to pay more, if not significantly more, for the burger from that place. Now, over the long haul, that pricing change could end up hurting, if not shutting down the business, because if the price goes up too much, people will stop buying it. It's not everything in our society is something of need, right? Not like maybe medication, water. You need food. But do you need fast food hamburgers? No, you don't need that. You may want it. It may be driven by demand, but it is not a need per se. So the effect could be that maybe one or two of those burger places could struggle if they suddenly have to increase their prices to the point where the consumer rejects the item itself. Now, that could be an example of something affecting pricing. But one thing that you don't hear about on the news is that there is monetary inflation. Monetary inflation comes from the currency itself. And you could have the exact same thing happen where, guess what? The person who's selling the meat has to raise the cost of their meat because the food that they provide to their cows so that they can get you that meat, that food costs more to them now. Because guess what? The people who make the grain or whatever they're feeding the cows, that now costs more for them. The transportation costs of getting the meat to the butcher or getting the meat from the butcher out to the burger shops, that cost goes up because of monetary inflation. Then now the question begs again, what is monetary inflation then? Okay, is inflation just things going up? No, things going up in cost is a symptom of inflation. So for example, monetary inflation is every time you increase the money supply. So if there's $10 in circulation and I add $2 more to circulation, there's now $12 in circulation. Well, if I only had, let's just say, if I had $5 and there's $10 in circulation, I have 50% of the money supply. But then if I add $2, or if a central bank adds $2 to the money supply, now there's $12 in circulation. I still only have $5. So do I have 50% of the money supply? No, because 5 divided into 10 is 50%. But 5 divided into 12, that's less than 50%. That would be about what, 40%, or certainly less than 50. So what happens is I've gotten poorer, or my purchasing power has gone down because I now have less money in the total supply, and therefore I am worth less. My money is worth less. Well, that's what happens to all of us every single day. Not only is there a tax on every dollar that we have because that money is borrowed from the Federal Reserve and has to be paid back with interest, but the dollar itself, as soon as it comes off the printing press, it's actually, your dollar is now worth less than it was the moment that before the dollar from the printing press arrived, because it is a representation of a smaller fraction of the total money in circulation. You have a smaller piece of the pie. Not because you spent it, but because somebody else added to that pie. It's a very unnatural system. So what happens is you're in a weaker position. Well, that's what's happening to suppliers in the supply chains issue now. It's not just that there's COVID shortages, but that the COVID as an event is something that put extra pressure on a system that was already fragile to begin with, due to the fact that we had artificially low interest rates and we're printing so much money at once. I mean, before COVID, we were still printing an astronomical amount of money. We still had debt over $20 trillion, which is ridiculous. But now that has been added to because we've been printing trillions and trillions of dollars in order to catch up on what we call the problem from COVID. But the issue there is that with a sensitive system, we've now created what cannot be hidden in pricing inflation due to monetary inflation. Now, the Fed has to raise interest rates because there's nowhere for them to go. But the question is, for regular people who have regular dollars, how much more damage can be done to your dollar? How much more damage can be done to your pricing or to your purchasability? The answer is a lot, because the true value of a dollar has actually lost about 97% of its value since 1913. Which also calls into question if the Federal Reserve's job is to decrease the amount of booms and busts we have in our economy, which, first of all, I don't believe that any institution actually has that ability or even that responsibility. Because if you think about it, an institution cannot manage a whole economy. So they have the responsibility or the added task of trying to keep things in line for an economy. But that's extremely difficult to do as a business practice. And they have been in charge and had the only printing press in town for a country for over 100 years, and the currency in that country has only lost value. Here's a quick way to check if what I'm saying sounds crazy. Ask your grandfather how much he used to pay for a piece of pizza. Ask your father how much he paid for his first car. Ask your mother how much she used to pay for milk back maybe 15, 20 years ago. One pattern you're going to notice, regardless of the timeline, regardless of the person, everything has gotten more expensive. Now, because this is the norm that 3 or 4 generations of people have lived with, most of the time we don't look at things getting more expensive as being a problem because we think, well, that's how it goes, right? The longer you live, the more expensive things get. But here's a question for you. Technology is there to make things cheaper and to make things more efficient. And usually the efficiency drives the cost of labor and the cost of the good in creating the good. So the theory in technology is that you have added help from a machine, let's say, so that you can produce things quicker and cheaper. That would be the case in almost every instance when you compare a good and a service from 100 years ago to today. So if we make cars more efficiently than we did in 1913, we build houses more efficiently than we did in 1913, not saying better, but just more efficiently. We manufacture cigarettes, we manufacture juice, soda, candy canes, whatever you want, whatever you could name. It's done more efficiently now than it was in 1913. But yet the dollar has less purchasing power today than it did then, and that good and that service costs more. Why is that? Because we have overinflated our currency. The whole point of Bretton Woods after World War II was that the United States would become the greenback. Our dollar would be that simple currency, the paper, that would represent the world's gold because the world put its gold in the trust of the United States because it was literally the only true Western power remaining that was pretty unscathed from a land perspective and a home perspective after World War II. Well, here we are in 2022, and the world's greatest lender has become the world's greatest debtor. And in the 70s, Nixon took us off this gold standard, so our dollar isn't really backed in gold anymore. It's not tied to that. And when people talk about being backed in gold and how that relates to the currency and blah blah blah, there's almost like I don't want to say a facile, but there's certainly a lack of fervence behind the commentary. It's just like something that's just said. But let's just say it in a different way, okay? If you have a currency, a paper currency, that's not backed in the only thing that has been considered money for 1,000 years, then what you're saying is it's not backed in anything. So it's literally only backed in the good faith of the United States. But the faith in the government of the United States is that it can be redeemed for something that has the true value. That's the whole point of paper currency. Paper currency is not money in itself. It's just a note. And it even says that on the dollar. It says Federal Reserve note. It's a note because it is redeemable for what it is in true money and true value, which is gold and silver. But you can't take your note and convert that to gold and silver if you go to your local bank. There was a time in this country where if you took paper to your bank, you could pull out your gold. No? There's no way to do that now. I mean, I would argue it's not even possible to pull out the money that you have if you have a significant amount because they don't keep that cash on hand. So that's a whole nother discussion. But when we got ourselves off the gold standard, we basically took away the ability to tie the dollar that you have, that paper note, back to something. Now, I may be repeating something you already know, but the reason that I'm bringing all this up is that as we hear on the news today about pressures from supply chain, we hear pressures from COVID, we hear the Ukraine war. Many of these things are true as individual instances, but they are not the root cause. They are not the reason that your milk is significantly more expensive than it was 10 years ago. Maybe it's the reason it's more expensive than it was a month ago, but it is not the reason it's more expensive than it was 10 years ago. And certainly it's not the reason it's more expensive 20 years ago. You are going to continue to pay more as your money is worth less and less and less. And wages, and this is something that every television network and newspaper concedes because it literally can't be faked. Wages do not keep up with inflation. Even the facile inflation numbers and the fugazi references to inflation that you will hear in the mainstream media, even they cannot hide the fact that, yes, you the citizen, your wages will not keep up with inflation. So what does that mean when they say that? That means that what you get paid for your labor is not going to sustain the pace of the increasing cost of living. That is terrible. That is the dagger in the neck. There is no way for you to win the long run. There's no way for you to win the race. Okay? If that is the case. Because what it's saying is there will come a time when your wages don't equate to the cost of living in the country that you're in. So what are you going to do then? Well, you will starve. That's what will happen. I mean, you could continue to downsize, you could try to work more, but it won't matter. And that sounds very doom and gloom, but that's the long of it. Now, the short is, there are things we can do to mitigate these problems, but are they going to be done? Our politicians are very reluctant to make the appropriate changes to help save the citizenship of this country from that pain. Very, very reluctant. And you can decide on your own why that is the case. But at the end of the day, you know, they typically don't want to cut budgets. They don't want to cut future spending. I would argue that they're just not on board with making the kind of changes that you would really need to have an effective healthier currency in an economy that is wholly dependent right now on this Federal Reserve banking system, because it's not like the Fed's going to go away overnight, and it may not even have to ever go away to fix the problem. I do think you can mitigate over time, but there's an unwillingness to do that because the politicians, they like the budgets they get, they like the money they have. And remember, inflation, monetary and pricing inflation, is a regressive tax. So the wealthier you are, the less it hurts you. The poorer you are, the more it hurts you. Because just think of this. If you have less money, and then suddenly if you have the least amount of money compared to the total money supply, adding 1% more makes you a lot poorer than someone who has a lot of money. They're not going to feel that difference. What's the difference to them? And so instead of having 10% representation of all the money, they have 9.5% because they have so much of it. But if you only have 1%, boy, dropping to 0.5%, that's critical to you. That's half of your money. That's not half the rich person's money. So they have a lot longer rope before they get hung. You, on the other hand, you're choking right now. So it's a regressive tax, but people in government and very wealthy people, they're concerned. But remember, when the process of hurting you is going on, they're still benefiting from it. Because whenever the government borrows money from the Fed, and then that money gets filtered through to large businesses who then borrow from large banks, you're not getting those loans. You're not getting those low interest rates. And you didn't even agree to print more of that money. Oh, you got a little handout of $600 during COVID from a check. But that $600 probably cost you $4,000 in the long run. That money is not free. It's your money. So there's just a lot that is, if it's not being incorrectly reported or misled, it certainly is incomplete. And when you start thinking of it in the way that I've been trying to describe to you, it should galvanize you during elections to ask these questions and to say we only want to put people in DC who are going to say no to this cancerous issue that is being ignored. It is literally a tumor in the United States that is just being completely ignored. Now, what's going to happen in the long run? I don't know. I don't know if there's ever going to be the kind of adjustments that you really need to make this thing go away. But certainly, in the short run, it doesn't look like there's going to be much of a slowdown. Because in the short run, we have a tremendous amount of energy for printing of money, for incremental increases in our interest rates, but nothing along the lines of addressing the monetary inflation problem. And until that's addressed, the pain that you're going through is going to continue. So this is just where we are. Best of luck to everybody, and I'll have more commentary on this issue and many others as I continue to try to add to this channel and add to the debate. So thank you very much.